The blistering sun hung in the sky like a relentless eye, staring down at the parched land of Stockton, California, in the summer of 1876. Lillian Greene pressed her palm against the wooden wall of her modest farmhouse, feeling the heat seep through her calloused fingers as she stared hopelessly at the cracked earth surrounding her dried-up well. 6 weeks a widow, and now this the worst heat wave in 30 years had claimed her only source of water. "Mama, is the water coming back soon?" Her 7-year-old son, Thomas, tugged at her skirt, his cherub face smudged with dust, eyes wide with innocent concern. Lillian forced a smile, reaching down to smooth his unruly brown hair. "Don't you worry about that, little man. We'll figure something out." Her throat felt like sandpaper as she swallowed. The truth was, she had no idea how they would survive. William had been gone barely 2 months, taken by a fever that swept through their small homestead like wildfire, leaving her alone with their son, and a farm teetering on the edge of ruin. The well had given its final drops 3 days ago. Their small barrel of reserve water would last perhaps another day if they were careful. After that, Lillian shuddered despite the heat. "Mrs. Greene, you home?" A deep voice called from beyond the front porch. Lillian smoothed her simple cotton dress, painfully aware of her disheveled appearance as she made her way to the front door. Standing there, hat in hand, was Kenton Blackwell, one of the cowboys from the Diamond B ranch that bordered her property to the west. She'd seen him around town occasionally, nodding politely as was proper, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. "Mr. Blackwell," she greeted, forcing strength into her voice. "What brings you by?" Kenton shifted his weight, the spurs on his boots jingling slightly. He was tall, sun-bronzed, with eyes the color of a summer storm and a face weathered by years under the open sky. "Rode by yesterday and noticed your well looked to be running dry." His gaze was direct but respectful. "Thought I'd check if you and the boy were managing all right." The kindness in his tone nearly broke her. Lillian tightened her grip on the doorframe, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. "We're fine, thank you," she lied, her pride refusing to bend. "No disrespect intended, madam, but that's not what I heard in town. Sheriff mentioned the whole valley's drying up and folks on the outlying homesteads are struggling." Thomas peered around her skirts, eyeing the tall cowboy with curiosity. Kenton nodded at the boy. "Hey there, young man." He looked back at Lillian. "Mrs. Greene, I've got water. Our ranch has a spring that's holding steady despite this devil heat. I'd be happy to bring you some." "I couldn't possibly accept," she began, but her voice cracked, betraying her desperation. "I insist," Kenton said firmly. "I'll be back tomorrow with water, just—" He paused, as if considering his words carefully. "Just neighbors helping neighbors. Nothing more." Before she could protest further, he placed his hat back on his head, tipped it slightly, and turned to mount his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that seemed almost too elegant for a working cowboy. "Mr. Blackwell," Lillian called after him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." He nodded once, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat, before riding away in a cloud of dust. True to his word, Kenton returned the next morning just as the sun crested the eastern hills. Lillian watched from her kitchen window as he guided his horse, which was pulling a small wagon laden with 3 large wooden barrels. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. "Morning, Mrs. Greene," he greeted, jumping down from his saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. "Mr. Blackwell," she replied, trying to keep her tone even despite the overwhelming relief she felt at the sight of those barrels. "You didn't have to do this." "Call me Kent," he said, already working to position the wagon near her house. "And yes, I did." Can't have a lady and her boy going thirsty when I've got plenty to share. Together they unloaded one of the barrels, rolling it carefully to a shaded spot behind her house. The effort left Lillian breathless, her muscles aching from exertion and days of rationing water. "This should last you a few days," Kent said, straightening up. "I'll bring more before you run out." "I can pay you," Lillian offered quickly, though she knew her meager savings would barely cover the cost if this drought continued. Kent shook his head. "Not looking for payment, madam. Just doing what's right." Thomas had emerged from the house, watching the cowboy with undisguised fascination. "Are you really a cowboy?" he asked, eyes wide. Kent chuckled, a warm, rumbling sound. "Sure am, partner. Work cattle over at the Diamond B." "My pa taught me to rope," Thomas announced proudly, "before he went to heaven." A shadow of sympathy crossed Kent's face. "Is that so? Well, maybe sometime you can show me your technique." Thomas beamed, and Lillian felt a pang in her heart. It had been too long since her son had smiled like that. As Kent prepared to leave, he paused, studying the withered cornfield beyond her house. "Mrs. Greene, that crop's not going to make it without water." "I know," she admitted, the weight of potential ruin heavy on her shoulders, "but I don't have the means to save it." He seemed to consider something, chewing thoughtfully on his lower lip. "I might have an idea. Let me talk to my boss. Maybe we can work something out." Before Lillian could respond, he mounted his horse and was gone, leaving her standing in a swirl of dust, wondering what kind of man would go to such lengths for a stranger. True to his word, Kent returned every other day for the next week, each time bringing fresh water and staying a little longer to help with small repairs around the homestead, a loose board on the porch, a broken hinge on the barn door, things William had meant to fix before illness took him. On his fourth visit, as they sat on the porch taking a brief rest, Kent finally shared his idea. "The ranch has got irrigation equipment we're not using right now," he explained, his hat resting on his knee, dark hair damp with sweat from helping her repair the chicken coop. "If you'd allow it, I could set up a temporary system from the creek that runs along the edge of your property. Wouldn't save all your corn, but might salvage enough to see you through winter." Lillian stared at him, speechless. Such an offer went well beyond neighborly kindness. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible over the constant drone of cicadas. Kent studied his calloused hands. "My ma was widowed young, 3 children and a farm that was too much for her to handle alone. Neighbors pitched in, kept us afloat until she could get back on her feet." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "Just paying it forward, Mrs. Greene." "Lillian," she corrected softly. "If you're Kent, then I'm Lillian." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his weathered features. "Lillian," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. The next day, Kent arrived with the irrigation equipment loaded on a larger wagon, along with 2 other cowboys from the Diamond B. They worked through the blistering heat, digging trenches and laying pipes to channel water from the small creek to her cornfield. By sunset, a trickle of precious water was flowing toward the parched crops. "It's not much," Kent admitted as they stood side by side, watching the water snake through the dry earth. "But it might save some of it." Lillian couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she reached out impulsively and squeezed his hand. His skin was rough, marked with the scars and calluses of hard labor, but his touch sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. He looked down at their joined hands, surprise evident in his expression, before gently returning the pressure. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Lillian sat alone on her porch, watching the stars emerge in the velvet sky. For the first time since William's death, she allowed herself to think of the future not with dread, but with cautious hope. As the days passed, Kent's visits became a welcome routine. He arrived each morning with fresh water, stayed to work on her farm until midday, then rode back to the Diamond B to fulfill his duties there, before returning sometimes in the evening with additional supplies: a sack of flour, fresh vegetables from the ranch garden, once even a small piece of hard candy for Thomas that made the boy's eyes light up with delight. 2 weeks into his daily visits, Lillian finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Won't your boss mind you spending so much time away from your duties?" They were sitting at her kitchen table, sharing a simple lunch of cornbread and bean soup she'd insisted on making for him. Kent smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Mr. Daniels is a fair man. Besides, he's sweet on the widow who runs the general store in town, so he understands about helping folks in need." "And is that what I am to you? Folks in need?" The question slipped out before Lillian could stop it, and she immediately wished she could take it back. It sounded ungrateful, demanding. Kent set down his spoon, his expression turning serious. "You're a strong woman facing hard times with more courage than most men I know. That earns my respect." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "And I enjoy your company, Lillian, more than I probably should admit." The honest admission hung between them, changing something fundamental in their relationship. Lillian felt her cheeks warm, and she busied herself with clearing the table to hide her reaction. "Thomas has taken quite a shine to you," she said, changing the subject slightly. Kent's smile returned. "He's a good boy. Smart, too. Been teaching him some proper roping techniques." "Hope you don't mind." "I'm grateful," Lillian admitted. "He needs a man's influence." As soon as the words left her mouth, she realized how they might sound and hurried to add, "I mean, it's good for him to have. That is." "I understand," Kent assured her, saving her from further embarrassment. "My pa died when I was 14. Would have given anything for someone to show me the things a father should." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and Lillian felt a strange fluttering in her chest, like a bird trying to take flight after a long winter. The moment was broken by Thomas bursting through the door, eager to show Ken a grasshopper he'd caught in a jar. Lillian watched them together, the tall cowboy crouching down to the boy's level, his patience and genuine interest in Thomas's discovery stirring emotions she'd thought had died with William. That evening, after Kent had left, promising to return the next day with more water and possibly some fresh beef from a steer the ranch had slaughtered, Thomas asked the question Lillian had been dreading. "Mama, is Mr. Kent going to be my new pa?" Lillian nearly dropped the plate she was drying. "Thomas, whatever gave you that idea?" The boy shrugged, his expression innocent but perceptive beyond his years. "He looks at you the way Pa used to, and you smile more when he's here." "Mr. Kent is being kind to us because we needed help," Lillian explained carefully, setting the plate down with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. "That doesn't mean—" "Well, it's not like that." "But could it be?" Thomas persisted. "I like him. He doesn't treat me like a baby, and he makes you happy." Lillian knelt before her son, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Oh, sweetheart, these things are complicated for grown-ups. Mr. Kent has his own life, his own work. Once the drought breaks and our well fills again, he'll go back to that life." The thought sent an unexpected pang through her heart, but she pushed it aside. Developing feelings for Kenton Blackwell would be foolish. He was a cowboy footloose by nature, unlikely to want the responsibility of a widow and her child. And she was still raw from losing William, still learning how to exist in this new reality as a woman alone. Yet that night, as she lay in her bed listening to the occasional distant rumble of summer thunder that brought no rain, Lillian found herself thinking of Kent's storm-colored eyes and the gentle way his weathered hands had closed around hers. The third week of Kent's water deliveries brought a change. The heat intensified, if that was even possible, turning the valley into an oven that shimmered with visible waves rising from the baked earth. Kent arrived later than usual, his face grim. "The creek's down to almost nothing," he reported, helping her roll the water barrel into its usual place. "And the spring at the ranch is showing signs of strain. Mr. Daniels has had to start rationing water for the cattle." Fear clutched at Lillian's throat. "Does that mean—" "I'll still bring you water," Kent assured her quickly. "Just, maybe not as much each time. We'll need to be more careful." That afternoon, they worked together to expand her water-saving measures, placing buckets to catch the rinse water from dishes, using the same water multiple times when possible, covering the water barrel tightly to prevent evaporation. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the parched land, Kent paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. "Lillian, I need to ask you something, and I want you to give me an honest answer." She looked up from the garden where she'd been spreading the dishwater around the few surviving plants. "Of course. Have you considered selling this place and moving to town? The bank would give you a fair price, even with the drought. You and Thomas could get a small house, maybe find work that doesn't depend on the weather." The suggestion stung more than she expected. "This is our home," she said quietly but firmly. "William and I built it together. His hands are in every beam, every wall. I can't just abandon it." Kent nodded slowly. "I thought you might say that. Just wanted to make sure you know there are options." "Are there?" she challenged, a sudden flare of frustration igniting in her chest. "For a widow with a young son and no skills besides farming, what kind of life would we have in town? Taking in laundry or sewing until my fingers bleed, living in some cramped room above a store." She shook her head fiercely. "No, I'll make this work, somehow." Kent stepped closer, his expression intense. "You don't have to do it alone, Lillian." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning beyond simple assistance with water and repairs. Lillian felt her breath catch, unsure how to respond. Before she could formulate an answer, the distant sound of hoofbeats interrupted the moment. They both turned to see a rider approaching at a swift gallop, one of the cowboys from the Diamond B. "Kent," the rider called as he drew near. "Fire's broken out on the North Range. Boss needs all hands." Kent's expression shifted instantly to alarm. "How bad?" "Bad enough. This heat's got everything ready to burn. Lightning strikes started it, and the wind's pushing it toward the main herd." Kent turned to Lillian, conflict evident in his eyes. "I have to go." "Of course you do," she agreed immediately. "Be careful." He hesitated just a moment longer, then impulsively reached out to squeeze her hand before sprinting to his horse and mounting in one fluid motion. With a final nod in her direction, he galloped away, following the other cowboy toward a distant smudge of smoke now visible on the horizon. Lillian watched until they disappeared from sight, an inexplicable sense of foreboding settling over her like a shroud. The ranch fire burned for 2 days, consuming nearly 100 acres of grazing land, and forcing the Diamond B hands to work around the clock to protect the cattle and the ranch buildings. Kent didn't return during that time, and Lillian tried not to worry, telling herself he was simply needed elsewhere. Still, she found herself scanning the horizon frequently, hoping to see his familiar silhouette approaching. On the third morning, just as she was beginning to seriously ration their remaining water, she heard hoofbeats. Relief flooded through her as she rushed outside, only to falter when she saw not Kent, but an older cowboy she recognized as the foreman of the Diamond B. "Mrs. Greene," he greeted, removing his hat. "Name's Frank Wilson. I work with Kenton Blackwell." "Is he all right?" Lillian asked immediately, fear clutching at her heart. Frank's weathered face softened slightly. "He's alive, madam, but he took a bad fall when his horse spooked near the fire line. Broke his leg and got some nasty burns on his arm. Doc's got him laid up in town." The news hit Lillian like a physical blow. "How serious is it?" "Doc says he'll heal, but it'll take time. Kent asked me to come tell you and to bring you some water." He gestured to the two smaller barrels in his wagon. "It's not much. The fire took a toll on our reserves, but it's what we could spare." Lillian nodded numbly, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. "Please tell him. Tell him we're thinking of him and hope he recovers quickly." Frank studied her face for a moment, then said quietly, "He was more worried about you and the boy than himself. Made me promise to keep bringing water until he's back on his feet." Something in the way the older man said it suggested he understood perfectly well what had been developing between Kent and Lillian. "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly ask." "You didn't ask, madam." "He did. And Kent's like a son to me, so I'll honor his request." Frank's tone brooked no argument. After helping her unload the water, Frank departed with a promise to return in 2 days, leaving Lillian to explain to Thomas why Kent wouldn't be visiting for a while. The boy's face fell at the news, confirming what Lillian already knew. Kent had become important to both of them in ways that went beyond mere survival. That evening, after Thomas was asleep, Lillian made a decision. Taking a small lantern, she walked to the edge of her property where Kent had rigged the irrigation system from the now nearly dry creek. Carefully adjusting the flow to ensure maximum efficiency with minimum waste, she then continued on foot toward town. The 3-mile journey in the dark was daunting, but the moon provided enough light to follow the road. By the time she reached the small town of Stockton, her feet were aching and dust covered her simple dress, but determination drove her forward. The doctor's office was dark except for a single lamp burning in a back room. Lillian knocked softly, hoping she wasn't disturbing other patients. After a moment, the door opened to reveal Dr. Martin, his spectacles perched on his nose and surprise evident in his expression. "Mrs. Greene. Is everything all right? Is it Thomas?" "No, Doctor, Thomas is fine. I came to inquire about Mr. Blackwell. I heard he was injured in the fire." Understanding dawned in the older man's eyes. "Ah, yes, he's resting now. The burns aren't as bad as they could have been, but the broken leg will keep him off a horse for at least 6 weeks." "Could I see him? Just for a moment?" Lillian asked, suddenly feeling foolish for having come all this way. Dr. Martin hesitated, then nodded. "Briefly. He's been asking about you and your boy, so perhaps seeing you will ease his mind and help him rest better." He led her to a small room at the back of his office where Kent lay on a narrow bed, his right leg splinted and elevated on a pillow, his left arm bandaged from wrist to elbow. His eyes were closed, his breathing deep and even. "Kent," Dr. Martin called softly, "you have a visitor." Kent's eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to astonishment when he saw Lillian. "Lillian, what are you doing here? Is everything all right?" He tried to sit up, wincing at the movement. "Stay still," she admonished gently, moving to his bedside. "Everything's fine. I wanted to see for myself that you were all right." Dr. Martin discreetly stepped out, closing the door partway to give them privacy while remaining within earshot. "You walked all the way to town. Alone." At night, Kent's concern was evident in his voice. Lillian smiled slightly. "I'm tougher than I look, Cowboy." A ghost of his usual smile flickered across his face. "Never doubted that for a second." His expression sobered. "I'm sorry about the water. Frank will keep bringing what we can spare, but with the fire damage." "Don't worry about that now," Lillian said, impulsively reaching out to take his uninjured hand. "Just focus on healing." Kent's fingers tightened around hers. "I was thinking about what you said. about not having options, about making it work somehow. Lillian nodded, wondering where he was going with this. I've been putting aside money, he continued, his voice low and earnest. Not much, but enough to maybe make a difference, I thought. Well, I thought maybe we could use it to dig your well deeper, try to reach water below the drought level. The offer stunned her. Kent, I couldn't possibly accept your savings. That's your future. His storm-gray eyes held her steadily. What if I want my future to include you and Thomas? The words hung in the air between them, impossibly significant. Lillian felt her heart beating wildly in her chest, a mixture of hope and fear warring within her. Kent, you're injured and exhausted. This isn't the time to make such declarations. Actually, lying here thinking I might never see you again made me realize there's no better time. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. I know it hasn't been long, and I know you're still grieving William. I'm not asking for promises. Just tell me there might be a chance when the time is right. Lillian felt tears prickling at her eyes. There might be, she whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. But right now, we both need to focus on surviving this drought. Kent nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer for now. Frank told me the weather service is predicting rain within a fortnight if we can hold on until then. We will, Lillian assured him with more confidence than she felt. Now rest. I need to get back to Thomas before he wakes. Kent frowned. You can't walk back alone in the dark. Stay in town tonight. Mrs. Johnson at the boarding house will give you a room. I can't leave Thomas alone. Then let me send someone to stay with him until morning. Kent was already trying to sit up again, clearly intending to arrange it somehow despite his condition. Lillian gently pushed him back against the pillow. I'll be fine. The moon is bright, and I know the way. Before he could protest further, she leaned down and, in a moment of boldness that surprised even herself, pressed a soft kiss to his forehead. Heal quickly, Cowboy. We miss you. The journey back to her homestead seemed shorter somehow, her steps lighter despite her fatigue. As she approached her property, the first hints of dawn were lightening the eastern sky. She slipped quietly into the house, checking on Thomas, who still slept soundly, then sank into a chair by the window, allowing herself a moment to process everything that had happened. Kent had all but declared his intentions toward her. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. Was she ready to open her heart again, so soon after losing William? Would it be a betrayal of his memory to find happiness with another man? Yet as she watched the sun rise over her struggling farm, Lillian acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. Life continued, even after devastating loss. William would have wanted her and Thomas to be happy, to be secure. And Kent had proven himself to be a man of honor and kindness, offering help when she needed it most, asking nothing in return except the chance to be part of their lives. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of increasing hardship. The heat showed no signs of abating, and despite Frank's faithful water deliveries every third day, Lillian found herself implementing ever more stringent conservation measures. The irrigation system Kent had installed saved a portion of her corn crop, but without rain, the harvest would be meager at best. True to his promise, Frank brought news of Kent with each visit. The burns were healing well, but the broken leg continued to cause him pain, and the doctor insisted he remain in town where he could be properly cared for. On the 17th day without Kent's presence, Lillian woke to an unusual sound, a soft pattering on the roof. For a moment she lay still, disbelieving, then rushed to the window. Rain, gentle but steady, falling from a sky heavy with dark clouds. For the first time in nearly 2 months, blessed rain was soaking the parched earth. Thomas, she called, her voice cracking with emotion. Thomas, wake up. It's raining. The boy scrambled from his bed, eyes wide with wonder as he joined her at the window. "Does this mean the well will fill again?" "If it rains long enough, yes," Lillian answered, already calculating how long it would take for the groundwater to replenish. They spent the morning outside despite the downpour, setting out every container they owned to catch the precious rainfall. Thomas splashed in puddles that formed in the yard, his laughter, a sound Lillian realized she hadn't heard nearly enough lately. By midday, the rain showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was falling harder, turning the dusty ground to mud and creating rivulets that carved paths through the parched earth. Lillian checked the well repeatedly, but knew it would take time for the water table to rise enough to reach the bottom of her relatively shallow well. As evening approached, bringing with it a cooler breeze than they'd felt in weeks, Lillian heard the now familiar sound of a wagon approaching. Expecting to see Frank with their regular water delivery, she was shocked when Kent himself appeared, his splinted leg propped awkwardly before him as he drove the team with one hand, his injured arm still bandaged but clearly functional. "Kent!" She gasped, hurrying toward the wagon despite the rain that plastered her dress to her body and her hair to her face. "What are you doing out in this weather? You should be resting." His face, thinner than when she'd last seen him but alight with determination, broke into a smile at the sight of her. "Couldn't miss the first rain, now could I? Besides, Dr. Martin said the damp might actually help my leg heal, something about swelling and inflammation." Thomas came running from the barn where he'd been watching the rain through the open door. "Mr. Kent, you're back." Kent carefully maneuvered himself down from the wagon, wincing slightly as he balanced on his good leg. He'd fashioned a crude crutch from a sturdy branch, which he used to steady himself. "Hey there, partner," he greeted Thomas warmly. "Looks like you've been busy catching rain." "We filled all the barrels and buckets and even Mama's washing tub," Thomas reported excitedly. "And I've been checking the well, but Mama says it takes time for the rain to soak down that far." "Your Mama's right about that," Kent agreed, his eyes finding Lillian's over the boy's head. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "Let's get you inside out of this rain," Lillian said, moving to help support him as he hobbled toward the house. "You shouldn't be putting weight on that leg yet." "I've been cooped up in that doctor's office for too long," Kent replied, but he accepted her assistance gratefully. "Needed to see for myself that you two were all right." Once inside, Lillian insisted Kent take the most comfortable chair while she heated water for coffee, and Thomas peppered him with questions about his injuries and the fire. The domesticity of the scene struck Lillian suddenly, the three of them together in the warm kitchen, while rain drummed on the roof, Kent's deep laugh mingling with Thomas's childish chatter, her own hands busy preparing food for them. It felt right in a way she hadn't expected. After Thomas had been sent to bed, his excitement finally giving way to exhaustion, Lillian and Kent sat by the fireplace, the small blaze taking the damp chill from the air. "You shouldn't have risked your health to come all this way," Lillian chided gently, though her heart sang at his presence. Kent's eyes reflected the dancing flames as he looked at her. "I had to come, Lillian. Every day in that sick bed, all I could think about was you and Thomas out here alone, trying to make do with the little water Frank could bring. We managed," she said simply, "and now the rain has come." "Yes, it has." Kent shifted slightly, grimacing at the movement. "Lillian, do you remember what we talked about that night in town, about there being a chance for us when the time was right?" Lillian felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "I remember. I've had a lot of time to think these past weeks, about what I want about the future." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I love my job at the Diamond Bee, but I've always wanted land of my own someday, a place to build something lasting. Lillian's heart began to beat faster. "Kent, let me finish, please," he said gently. "I know it hasn't been long since William passed. I know you're still healing and I would never rush you, but I care for you, Lillian, more than I thought possible in such a short time, and that boy in there." He nodded toward Thomas's room. "He's stolen a piece of my heart too." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. "What are you saying, Kent?" "I'm saying I want to court you properly when you're ready. I'm saying I see a future here with you and Thomas working this land together." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steadying. "I'm saying I think I could love you, Lillian Greene, if you'd give me the chance to try." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Lillian looked into his eyes and saw no guile there, only sincere emotion and perhaps a touch of apprehension at having laid his heart so bare. "I'm still grieving William," she said softly. "I probably always will in some way. He was a good man and a good husband." Kent nodded, understanding in his gaze. "I would never ask you to forget him." "But," Lillian continued, squeezing his hand, "these past weeks have shown me that my heart didn't die with him. When you didn't come when I heard you were hurt, I realized how much you've come to mean to me, to us." Hope dawned in Kent's expression. So yes," Lillian whispered, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, I think I could love you too, Kent Blackwell. In fact, I think I might already be halfway there." The rain continued to fall throughout the night, a steady, healing downpour that promised renewal. By morning, puddles had become small ponds in the lowest areas of Lillian's farm, and the parched earth had transformed into rich, dark mud that squelched underfoot as she made her way to check the well once more. Kent followed slowly on his crutch, his face tight with the effort but determined to accompany her. Thomas ran ahead, excited to see if water had returned to their vital source. "Anything?" Kent asked as Lillian leaned over the stone wall of the well, peering into its depths. She straightened, her face breaking into a radiant smile. "There's water. Just a few inches, but it's there." Thomas whooped with joy, and Kent's arm slipped around Lillian's waist, pulling her close in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. She leaned into him, allowing herself to savor the simple pleasure of being held. Over the next week, the rain continued intermittently, sometimes a gentle mist, other times a pounding deluge that threatened to wash away the newly sprouting grass. The well slowly refilled, its water table rising day by day. Kent, despite Lillian's protests about his leg, insisted on staying at the farm, sleeping on a pallet in the main room and helping with whatever tasks he could manage with one good arm and leg. Frank rode out from the Diamond B to check on him, bringing news that the ranch had weathered both the fire and the drought, though not without losses. He also brought a message from Mr. Daniels, the ranch owner, offering Kent his job back once he was healed, along with use of one of the line cabins on the ranch property if he wanted it. "What will you do?" Lillian asked that evening as they sat on the porch, watching another storm roll in from the west. The question was casual, but her heart raced as she waited for his answer. Kent was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the darkening sky. "I've been riding for other men since I was 16, he said finally. "Never minded it much. The work suits me, and most of the outfits I've worked for were fair. But lately—" He glanced at her, then back at the horizon. "Lately, I've been thinking it might be time to put down some roots." Lillian's breath caught. "Here, if you'll have me." Kent turned to face her fully, taking her hand in his. "I won't pretend I can replace William or that it'll be easy. This land is demanding and droughts will come again, but we'd face them together." "Are you proposing, Mr. Blackwell?" Lillian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I reckon I am, Mrs. Greene." The corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile. Not the most romantic timing, I'll grant you, with my leg in splints and another storm coming, but I've never been one for waiting once my mind's made up." Lillian laughed softly, tears threatening again. "You hauled water to a widow's well every day for a month. I'd say that's plenty romantic." Kent's expression grew serious. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering with words, Lillian leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that spoke more eloquently than language could. His arm came around her, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with gentle fervor. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the first drops of the new storm were beginning to fall around them. "Thomas will be pleased," Lillian murmured, resting her forehead against Kent's. "He's been hoping for this since your second visit." Kent chuckled. "Smart boy. Saw what was happening before I did, I think." They sat together as the rain intensified, watching nature continue its work of renewal. Lillian felt a sense of peace settle over her, a certainty that while life would never be without challenges, she would no longer face them alone. The following Sunday, dressed in their best clothes, Lillian and Kent stood before Reverend Phillips in the small white church in Stockton. Thomas stood proudly at their side, beaming as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. The ceremony was simple, attended by the hands from the Diamond Bee and a few townspeople who had come to know the story of the cowboy who hauled water to a widow's dry well. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Phillips declared with a smile. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Blackwell." Kent, his leg healing but still requiring the support of a cane, pulled Lillian close and sealed their vows with a kiss that promised a lifetime of devotion. Thomas clapped enthusiastically, and the small congregation joined in with cheers and well wishes. As they walked back down the aisle together, Kent with his slight limp, Lillian with her arm linked through his, Thomas skipping ahead, Lillian caught sight of the summer sky through the church windows. Clouds were building again to the west, promising more of the nourishing rain that had transformed the valley from dusty brown to vibrant green. "Looks like more rain coming," she observed as they emerged into the sunlight. Kent followed her gaze, then looked down at her with a smile that warmed her to her core. "Good thing we've got a solid roof and a full well to see us through." "And each other," Thomas added, slipping his small hand into Kent's free one. Kent's expression softened as he looked at the boy who was now his son in every way that mattered. "That's the most important part, partner. That's what will see us through whatever comes our way." As they rode back to their farm, their home in the wagon Mr. Daniels had insisted on lending them as a wedding gift, Lillian leaned against Kent's shoulder, contentment filling her heart. The drought that had threatened everything she held dear had, in its way, delivered an unexpected blessing. A second chance at love, a partner to share her burdens, and a future bright with promise. The memory of those desperate days when her well ran dry would always remain with her. But now they were tempered by the knowledge of what had grown from that hardship, a love as deep and sustaining as the waters that once again flowed beneath their land. In the years that followed, as their family grew to include 2 more children, a girl with Kent's storm-gray eyes and a boy with Lillian's quiet determination, they weathered other droughts, other hardships. But they faced them together, drawing strength from the bond that had been forged in the crucible of that blistering summer of 1876, when a cowboy had hauled water to a widow's dry well, and in doing so, quenched a thirst they hadn't known. They shared the thirst for companionship, for partnership, for love that could flourish even in the most barren of circumstances. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Kent surprised Lillian with a stone bench placed beside their well. Carved into its surface were the words, "From drought springs life's greatest blessing." sitting there together as the sunset painted the western sky in hues of gold and crimson, their children playing nearby. Lillian knew those words held the truth of their story, a story of hope found in hardship, of love blooming in the most unlikely of seasons. Regrets? Kent asked softly, his arm around her shoulders, the lines around his eyes deeper now, but his gaze still holding that same steadiness that had first drawn her to him. Lillian shook her head, leaning into his embrace. Not one. Every drop of water you brought was worth its weight in gold, but what you really gave me was far more precious. And what was that, Mrs. Blackwell? He teased, using the formal address that had become a private joke between them. She smiled up at him, her heart as full as their well after a season of abundant rain. Hope, Mr. Blackwell. You gave me hope when mine had run as dry as that well, and that was worth more than all the water in California. Kent's kiss was as tender as it had been on their wedding day, a reaffirmation of promises kept and a pledge of those yet to be fulfilled. As their family gathered around them in the gentle evening light, Lillian knew that while drought would always be a possibility in this harsh but beautiful land, their love would remain an ever-flowing spring, nourishing all that grew in its path. And that, she thought as she looked at the life they had built together, was the true miracle that had emerged from the heat wave that had once threatened to take everything she loved, a miracle not of rain or water, but of the human heart's remarkable capacity to find abundance even in the midst of scarcity.